Hello, welcome to our lunch study break. It is Wednesday, November 24th, 2021. It is the day before Thanksgiving and just a few days before Hanukkah. And we're going to be continuing what we have been learning, I would say, for the past few months, which is how do we connect with prayer? How do we liven up our prayer lives? What do we do when we have prayers that we don't agree with? How do we find connection? How do we enter into the God zone, to use Rabbi Tzvi's words? And we at Congregation Beth Shalom, we're celebrating our first century here this year with all of our centennial events. We are making an effort to make sure that people, wherever they come from, whatever the background, that they feel like they can belong here as well. And part of that belonging is making sure that they have access points into prayer. So adding the program for the Explore, which is run by David Israel Katz, and our Lifelong Learning Mora Derech, which you should see about, which is alternative expressions. I think their next program is on Saturday, December 18th. We have Rabbi Tzvi doing Rejoice. We have Rabbi Russell doing Sing. We are also going to be changing out our Shabbat morning prayer books. So one of our efforts is going to be livening up our Shabbat morning services and making sure, quite frankly, that when people walk into our shul on a Shabbat morning, which if you've noticed has been pretty active and robust, thankfully, that they don't feel lost, that they can follow along, that they can find their way, and that they can create the pace that is appropriate for them. And so towards that effort, we are swapping out our Sim Shalom books that you are all very familiar with, and we are going to be replacing them this coming, not this Shabbat, next Shabbat. We are going to replace it December 4th. Judah already has his copy. Look at that. Judah's already prepared. But we have been talking about replacing all of our Sidurim. And so when you come on December 4th, it will be Shabbat of Hanukkah. We will have a brand new prayer book for you. And this session today is meant to explain why. First of all, why are we changing the prayer books? What's the difference between our previous prayer books that we've had? And how will this new prayer book, the Siddur Lev Shalem, enhance our prayer? So I'm going to be teaching today. Rabbi Russell is going to be teaching a class on this on Monday, December 3rd, showing us all the different ways that we can utilize the new book to create a more singing, joyful congregation. And this is the rollout. So before we enter into the conversation, I have a lot to share about this particular book. Hello, Riva. I have a lot to share about this particular book. I am curious to know some just reactions to previous conversations that we've had about prayer. What did you think of Rabbi Tzvi? What did you think of David Israel Katz's interpretation? What did you think of Rabbi Hirsch? And I guess historically, what have you felt about our prayer book that we use for Shabbat? So does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to begin with and share? Nobody has any thoughts? Did you like any of the interpretations, Lisa? Yeah.
I think if we get rolling, then people will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what any aspects that Rabbi Tzvi or David or Rabbi Hirsch shared about prayer that resonates with you? Judah is raising his hand.
Well, I'll just say, if I show up at Beth Shalom for Kabbalat Shabbat and there's two women wrestling, that's, the last time I'll show up at Beth Shalom.
All right, good.
That really, that really did not resonate with me.
Great.
And back in the day, back when I was in San Francisco, Tzvi used to have gatherings at his home, which I went to. And it'll be interesting. Of course, I won't be coming then because I'm not in San Francisco now. But I definitely think music is wonderful, and it's a way to connect. And I've just recently added. I sit every day. I have a sitting practice, and I used to sing a song, and now I've decided, like, before I even begin my sit, there's so much beautiful music out there that, I just listen to, like, get in the mood. And that's why, that's why I go to B'nai Yeshurun. I mean, their music, if you haven't experienced, and you can, listen to it on YouTube, it's just gorgeous. And so I think music is a nice pathway to prayer.
Amen.
And by the way, Dan, I can sing like you can sing, although I think you sing a little better than me.
Wow. All right. I agree with Judah. Obviously, music is a big part of my life. It's a big part of my prayer life, and it's a way that we have thought and tried to create new musics. I think for some people, the traditional Ashkenazic tropes and musicalities really connect and work for them. To other people, it's the Sephardi, the Mizrahi, the Israeli. They're different musics, and some might be the contemporary or the blues. So I have always, Judah, tried to tickle people's ears in a way, and to use musicians and artists to donate their craft and their creativity l'shem shamayim. Because if we can bring in great artists who can use their art to elevate our prayer, I've always felt, why aren't the great artists in the shul? And so the more, and of course, historically, they have been, and maybe some of them are beginning to return. And I think that if we can create a space that allows for genuine artistry and creativity to happen within the service, we can uplift a lot of us. But as Judah notices, you can go a little too far sometimes for him. And I think part of what we're doing here is enabling each of us to find where our comfort zones is, right? So traditionally, a conservative shul might be, you come in, this is the service, and it's all on you. Right? You've got to figure out what you're going to do with that. And we're going to give you a really fancy prayer book to help you do that. And that's great. But more than that, the synagogue, a robust Jewish community, to be full, needs to have more than one expression of prayer in it, because there's more than one expression of what it means to be a human being in all of the people who make up our congregation. And so I'd like to see if I can get each of you to tiptoe into an avenue of prayer that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, that's a little bit outside of the norm, that maybe challenges you to work or study a little bit more, and to see, hey, I really like that, or I really didn't like that. I think sometimes if you can connect to the aspects of prayer that you don't like, okay, well, then we can find a way to minimize those for you, and maybe create a way where those don't become stumbling blocks in front of you to prevent you from, I guess, having the experience with the rest of us. Don.
Yeah, I've gotten great value so far from this prayer thing that we've been doing for a couple of months. One of the main things I like about it is the openness. So in my own personal prayer life at home, because of all the different ways that we've been talking about, the openness, my prayer has gone to a different level. And it's really, I'm getting more and more, it's my prayer. So I've always had a problem with, quote, Jewish prayer, which probably isn't Jewish prayer. It's just my history of the way I was told it was supposed to be. And that part of it. So I've been practicing, it's really interesting. I go into my meditation, which I do a lot of meditation, and go into the prayer and saying, well, okay, I'm Jewish, so let's try it from a Jewish perspective. Not from what anybody else has told me, although I listened to everything. And so I've just been praying on the blessing that goes from God to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and down, and just trying to tune into that. And by doing that kind of prayer, it does make me feel more, quote, Jewish, but Jewish in the way of oneness with all people, as opposed to separate.
Without all of that baggage and that have to, and that negativity, which is so laden for a lot of people every time they open up a prayer book or walk into a place of worship. And I think I'm glad to, I mean, it's very validating to hear that you've been having that experience, Don. That's exactly the experience that we're trying to create for people so that they can find what their prayer is. Because my prayer is going to be different from your prayer, because your relationship with God is going to be different from my relationship with God. How could it be exactly the same? And so, is there a communal prayer and an individual prayer where we can find that is perhaps distinct from the ways that prayer have been taught before? And figuring out, what sort of book can we give to people that they can come in and have their own individual experience of their own prayer within a communal setting. So what I want to do now is play some audio for you. And this audio comes from my professor when I was at JTS. He was the dean of rabbinical students. His name was Rabbi Edward Feld. And Eddie Feld is a poet. His wife is Meryl Feld, a poet. He's a liturgist. He's a midrashist. He's a brilliant thinker. He currently lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. And he would come in and he would be the dean for all of the rabbinical students. And I'll just tell a quick story about Rabbi Feld. He had a really interesting way about him, very different from myself. So when you met with Rabbi Feld, if you did something wrong, he would call you into his office as a rabbinical student, and he would sit there and you would ask him a question. Rabbi Feld, tell me, what do you make of all of this? And he would just sit and it would go on. The silence would just go on beyond where I'm like, beyond normal human pauses. And at first I thought I was doing something wrong. And then he did it for the next question and for the next question and for the next question. And I, perhaps you've noticed, don't really operate that way, to my detriment. In a certain way, perhaps Rabbi Feld's modeling of how to listen and how to pause was perhaps a curative. I don't know. It felt a little long for me, but it gave you time to reflect and to pause and to be present with him. And so he just had a beautiful way that I'll never forget about the power of silence. Okay, so what I want to do is, he is the senior editor of this book. He also edited Machzor Lev Shalem, and he participated in a podcast with Vox Tablet that I would like to have us listen to, and then go and take a look at his new prayer book itself. And let's see if this works for everybody here. Do you hear that?
Briefly.
Great. Where is everybody? I don't see anybody though. There's the video panel. Great. Okay.
So 15 years ago, the conservative movement released a new Siddur, and 15 years isn't really such a long time. Why put a new one out already?
The Sim Shalom, which was the previous Siddur, was not really a new Siddur. It was rather a revision of what had gone before. And there was a real need to do something new. First of all, in terms of translation, while Sim Shalom was an attempt to do a more gender-neutral translation, it wasn't completely gender-neutral, and that was a very important consideration for us. It also continued some of the practices of earlier conservative prayer books, which was that if something wasn't quite theologically acceptable to a contemporary audience, it made nice of those expressions. It translated things in a non-literal way. And this was a decision to make a more literal translation of the Siddur. There are actually, in the previous edition, sentences which appear in the Hebrew which are not translated in the English. And there are some English sentences which don't appear at all in the Hebrew. And that was part of this giving an interpretive reading rather than a literal reading of the text. We were much more literal in our translation, feeling that this generation of Jews really want to have a prayer book that tells it like it is, and they will make the decisions of what they believe or don't believe, but don't want anybody else to make those decisions for them.
Before we get to some specifics about Siddur Lev Shalem, I just wanted to ask you sort of generally, for people who don't know, if you can give us a kind of brief history of the Siddur. How and when did it first come together as a whole text? Not your Siddur in particular, but just the Siddur, the idea of Siddur.
Well, you're actually asking a very interesting question, which doesn't have a simple answer. Siddur, it comes from the word seder, which means order. And in the first millennia, people developed a notion of the order of the service and what ought to be included, at least minimally, in a prayer service, especially in regards to a Shabbat service, but also an everyday service. Gradually, people began writing manuscripts of these prayers, and the form of the prayer that took place in Germany, which we call Ashkenaz, and then went to Eastern Europe, is basically the form that our Siddur has. The last service, interestingly, that entered the prayer book was Kabbalat Shabbat, the welcoming of Shabbat, and that service, which developed in the 16th and early 17th century, was in fact the last service to come in, and it's not a coincidence that happened at the age of printing, so that the prayer book has become even more fixed with the age of printing. And what we did in this Siddur is try to open up that process again to make it more as it was in that first millennia where the process was more open, and also as it was in the Middle Ages when, before the time of printing, when people added individual prayers to the service. So in many places in this Siddur, we offer alternatives for people. This is not a Siddur which you could just use from beginning to end, but it is a Siddur which a congregant, a leader of the service, has to make some choices about what they want to include and not, and that brings us back to actually the origins of the Siddur.
I want to ask.
Okay, so just a little bit before we get into the particulars of this edition of our Siddur versus the previous edition. Obviously, I resonate very much with Rabbi Feld's perspective. As you'll see, it's easier said than done to be put into print. I remember when I was in rabbinical school, I had the real privilege of working with Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman and Rabbi Neil Gilman, who were working to create a machzor, a high holiday prayer book for the JBI, the Jewish Braille Institute. And it wasn't in Braille, it was large type for those who are reading impaired. But Rabbi Gilman, from the conservative perspective, and Rabbi Hoffman, from the Reform perspective, wanted to create one machzor so the JBI didn't have to print two separate machzors, one for Reform and one for conservative. Okay, so you can imagine how complicated it might have been in a large type print for the blind to be able to create a prayer book that is usable and pluralistic, not easy to do. But for those of us who have come to our high holidays here and have used the machzor, which was also edited by Rabbi Feld, it is in the same style. So first of all, what do you hear? What do you hear in Rabbi Feld's approach to the Siddur? Any response on his history of the Siddur and this particular iteration? All right. So let's go forward. I'm going to try something with this next clip here. If I don't have any comments here, I'm going to try to show you the text while he talks. Rabbi Russell, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull this off, but I'm going to give it a shot. So for example, let me see, hold on one second. All right. Okay. Nod your heads if you can hear the question here.
You some details about Siddur Lev Shalem. There is a lot of explanation in it. The way
Did that sound like the previous one sounded or worse?
Fine.
Okay, so now I'm going to try to add in the text so that I can scroll over the text as he explains the different parts of the document. Okay, so does everyone see that document there? Okay, is it too small? Does it need to be bigger for anybody?
Bigger.
Bigger, all right.
Bigger.
I'm going to lose some of it, the formatting. So just a heads up, I'm going to lose some of the formatting as I go bigger. All right, so now I'm going to turn Rabbi Feld back on, and let's see if I'm able to pull this off. All right, hold on.
It looks, for people who haven't seen it yet, is almost
Mark?
like you have in the center of the page, you have the prayers, and then along the margins, almost like a page from Talmud, you have commentary. What are the kinds of commentaries that you and your fellow committee members who made the Siddur, what did you include?
So I want to talk about that form for a minute. To my mind, a Jewish book has that form on a page in which there is an internal dialogue going on. Comments is speaking to the prayer. The prayer is influencing the way that people are thinking, talking. And so having a prayer book that looks like this, that looks like a page of Talmud, to my mind, makes it into a more Jewish book. And interestingly, these days, even in Israel, where you assume people know Hebrew and therefore should know the prayers, most prayer books are being printed with a commentary because it's just not possible any longer to simply open up the prayer book and even if you're a Hebrew speaker, know why this prayer was here, know the meaning of some difficult words, understand how prayers flow from one another. And so the commentary does that. The commentary that we have on the right-hand side of the page is a commentary which gives historical background to the prayers, gives a context. Why is this prayer here? It also is in dialogue with the prayer. If there are difficult words or concepts, we try to engage that as a question that the reader may ask. How should I think about this? What are the possibilities here? And so the commentary on the right-hand side serves all of those functions. On the left-hand side of the page, we have other Jewish sources which speak to the prayers on the page, contemporary poems and medieval poems which speak to the themes, kavanot, intentions about how one might think of this prayer. We have a kind of dialogue going on in which, in some cases, the alternate sources which we have on the left-hand side of the page are, in fact, different ways of thinking about the issue than the prayer itself. And so the page is, in fact, a conversation.
How did you decide in conducting that conversation which specific commentaries or supplemental readings or thoughts to include?
Well, the first thing we did was the translation, and the translation frequently motivated the commentary. That is, you can say a prayer all your life, and yet when you have to translate it, you say to yourself, oh my God, I never understood that, or I mistakenly understood that, or what does that really mean? And in responding to those impulses as you translate, that gives rise to the commentary. That is I assume that what disturbed me, what was difficult in translation, are the very things that we should be talking about in the commentary. So the translation gives rise to the commentary, and the prayer itself, in which you want to say something about its history and its context, all of that. And then you realize, what will people need to, how will they respond to this prayer? What will people need to understand it? And those gave rise to the sources that we did on the left-hand side, of comments from all kinds of Jewish sources that relate to and speak to the prayer and give insight into the prayer, argue with the prayer, are in dialogue with the prayer.
A moment ago, you were saying that if something was particularly troubling to you in translating it, then that was something maybe you wanted to find some commentary on, or a supplemental reading that would look at that matter in a different light. What's a specific example of something that you were translating that was distressing to you, or sobering, or just gave you pause?
Well, a classic example is the second blessing of the Amidah, which goes, "Who gives life to the dead?" Now, I'm sure that the people who wrote the prayer, and for many Jewish generations, that had a very specific meaning of life after death and the physical resurrection of the body after death in the end time. But that's a more difficult concept for many of us. Certainly, it is not something that I can hold on to. And there would be the choice of just throwing out the prayer or changing its language, which is what the Reconstructionists did and what classical reform did with that prayer. We've kept the prayer, and then in the margin we have a comment, and here I'll quote to you the comment. A Hasidic master taught, "There are parts of ourselves that have become deadened. When we pray this blessing, we might ask ourselves, what part of myself needs to be awakened? What should I be concerned with that I have forgotten?" So life to the dead becomes a prayer about that which has become deadened inside us, parts of ourselves that we're no longer in touch with. And in praying this second blessing of the Amidah, we can be awakened to the question of, how do we renew ourselves? What in ourselves needs renewal? And I must say that for myself, after finding this comment and having it in the Siddur, the way I pray this blessing has been transformed.
No, I went.
Okay, so you get a sense of how lovely Rabbi Feld is as a teacher, right? I mean, just if I'm going at 180, he's going at 2. But just totally lovely and magnificent as a rabbi and as a teacher. So what did you think about his sort of his layout there and his use of that prayer Mechayeh Meitim as an example? Thoughts about that? Yeah, Lisa, go right ahead.
I just love that he embraces the difficulty. We are Yisrael, we who wrestle with God. Everyone has different expectations of what's going to happen when they walk into shul. I'm not sure why we expect it to be easy. The word difficulty is all over the Talmud, right? That's us.
I mean, our name is wrestle. I mean, absolutely, Lisa. That's correct. And I've always felt that for me, honesty, intellectual honesty, Rabbi Gilman, my professor, used to say the only intellectually honest two Jews conversation that two Jews can have or two people can have about God is one in which they sit in silence. But then he would say, we need to talk. So I love the pursuit of intellectual honesty and hiding aspects of the tradition, sweeping aspects of the tradition under the rug, as opposed to handling them head on, I think is missing a lot of the point. So I agree with you too. Judah, who's got a copy of this book there with him. Yeah. What do you like?
And I might say that, you know, I've been davening with this book for 2 years now, or I think 2 years. And it's seldom that I go to the side. And I always feel like I'm missing something. You know, it's kind of like I can't multitask. And
me neither.
Yeah, well, I think it's, you know, our brain. Well, I'm too old. I don't know what your excuse is.
I don't believe multitasking is possible. Yes.
But I like to be present, you know, and pay attention to what I'm reading, what I'm saying, what I'm feeling. And so I feel like I'm missing all this stuff on the side, you know, and it's
Can I ask a question?
Like
Is that because you're rushed? Do you feel rushed? Do you want more time?
Well, I mean, I like to keep up with the service, so I can't say the prayer and read the stuff on the side at the same time. I mean, it's like this is a book you could go and read, not while you're praying, but I think I got enough other stuff to read. So anyway, you know, on occasion, I will go and I will read what's on the sides, and you know, it's wonderful stuff, and it gives good understanding. I just, you know, like in the Talmud, they weren't praying, so they could spend as much time as they wanted doing all this. But when I'm praying, I like to be present. That said,
I stop there. I'd hold that point because I love that first point, and that first point highlights some of the aspects with some of the publications that the conservative movement has put out. Let me hold up one of such publications, where we're really viewing something from an academic, intellectual, scholarship approach. And I don't really go to shul sometimes for that. Like, I want to be elevated. I want to get caught up by Rabbi Russell's melodies. And I don't care about Wissenschaft Judentums, the historical study of texts. I just want to pray. So you read sometimes in the Eitz Chaim something that is like, oh, the splitting of the sea. Well, it didn't have to split. I'm just like, what? No, let's say it's split. The Torah is open. We've done the whole, you know, majesty of taking the Torah out of the ark. Why undercut the beauty of the experience we're trying to have? So I don't know if that's exactly what you said, Judah, but I feel it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wasn't judging it. Just I was more giving my experience that it wasn't possible for me to do. Here was all this wonderful stuff, and I couldn't, you know, most of the time take advantage of it.
It's like an off ramp it's like an off ramp on a highway. You have to get, have to, if you want to read it, you're going to have to take an off ramp. Yep.
Right. So that was one thing. The other thing, you know, I mean, I liked what he said, team about, you know, raising the dead to life. I liked his take, his explanation. Not that I agree, you know, whatever. But he picks out like one sentence in the Amidah. It says, like, I think it's 4 times. You know, it's not just that one sentence. It says it, you know, we say it 4 other times during the meet about giving life to the dead. So I just find that kind of strange that, you know, he just picks out this one sentence. And by the way, the Reform movement, which indeed took it out, guess what? They put it back.
That's right. That's right. They did take it out. They changed it to Michaye HaKol, which means he who creates all life, gives life to everything, or creates all, right? They softened it, but now people wanted it back. So but I think the point of this is to some of us here who might not respond well to the resurrection of the dead, of God coming down and resurrecting dead bodies, might be put off, right? So we've had this conversation the last couple of months. People open up the prayer book, they don't like what they see, and they're put off by it. I think your point, Judah, is well taken. The one little Hasidic story doesn't really account for the number of times it appears in the Siddur. I know Rabbi Feld thinks, oh, I put the Hasidic story, that makes it better. You're saying there are still troublesome things that putting Hasidic stories here and there might not account for. Ben Chin is raring to get in here. I see it coming down.
I didn't raise my hand. I have things to say.
I saw you moving, getting ready. Yes.
I don't know. I just wonder, like, I think it's I mean, how we're supposed to read the commentary and pray at the same time is a really interesting question. I think another question is just what we're supposed to do with the prayers at all. I mean, everybody points to this thing of raising the dead, right? But I'm fairly sure that there's hundreds of passages that any typical congregant will not believe.
Go to the left margin. Go to the left column. You don't believe it, go to the left.
Right.
Rabbi
So-
Russell, we should come up with some chant. Don't believe, I don't know. We'll come up with some rhyme. Go to the left, historical context, go to the right.
Right. So I dig the whole Yisrael thing, but at what point are you struggling against the language so much that you have to ask, why are we using this language in
You've
the first
larded up,
place?
you've larded up the book too much. It's no longer usable, right?
I mean, we all know that we can interpret our way out of anything, right? But surely the words are there for surely there's a reason why we use these words. If there's not a reason why we use these words, then we could use other words, right? So I kind of wish there was maybe more of that,
Well,
I mean,
I
maybe
guess
there is,
to
but
make an apology.
Yes, I think a lot of these prayer books, I think probably this one included, introduce apologies for the text, right? Whereas it might be, I want to buy into it. I don't want to have to wrestle with it. I want to know, okay, well, why am I actually saying this? Why these words, right? If we don't like it and we have to apologize for it, then why? Because people believed them 500 years ago, even though we all understand we don't believe them anymore? Or, is there something actually there that doesn't require an apology?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this. So I'm just going to pick a brief detour, which is reports from the field. And Rabbi Jeffrey Abraham says, from the first moment we began using Lev Shalem this past May, the positive change in our service was felt immediately. As a synagogue that already had the Machzor, it didn't take long for us to adjust. It was wonderful. This, I think, goes to your question. It was wonderful having comprehensive explanations in Lev Shalem, because obviously your question needs to be answered by the rabbi, Ben, or at least addressed by the rabbi, because it allows me as the rabbi to point to some of the explanations throughout the service. Now, instead of me simply explaining from the bima and hoping that people will listen, those who are visual learners can read and learn more about it themselves. He's able to point to these different kavanot and to allow him to teach, because your questions, that goes to the heart of why we are gathering together as a community. And each of the communities in the conservative movement might have different ways of addressing that. And so he's going to try to create a prayer book. Yeah, go, Ben. That's welcoming to all comers. Go before I go on.
All right. I have one alternate approach, which is maybe it's okay to just read it and not feel comfortable.
Yeah, but people don't come back.
Well, but you talked about this, right? I mean, and you're not alone. I think every rabbi I've ever heard talks about the ways in which, our practice and our being together in community should shake us up a little bit, right? We shouldn't feel the same about what we do in a sacred space, in a holy way, the same way we feel about everything else. And so maybe it's okay for us to fully invest in reading something and giving it breath that we don't believe or understand or feeling comfortable with, and just seeing what happens.
It's a heavy ask. So, I appreciate it, but that's a heavy duty ask, I think, to ask Jews writ large. I would say that what Rabbi Feld is trying to do, and why some people resonating with it, and some on this call resonating with it, is because There are stock translations, interpretations, and meanings that all of us here in our relationship to conservative Jewry or Judaism in general are familiar with, whether it's the Shema, or whether it's the Mechayim Eitim that you just mentioned, or the Aleinu. We've heard this interpret, or it's the Ten Commandments. We've heard it interpreted in the rigid conservative fundamentalist way already, and that has adhered into a lot of our psyches to such an extent that Don is saying, wow, to even walk into a shul where I don't have to adopt the normative or traditional read of this text, but in which we honor the most multiplicity of readings of this particular text. We honor the multiplicity of interpretations. Shivim Panim LeTorah, there are 70 sides to the Torah. And I think from a PR or from a community building standpoint, there is this overarching understanding that the text means something. And for a lot of people, it's that they're doing it wrong. I don't know why, but that's how we've taught it to a lot of us over the last 50 years. And so what I think Eddie Feld is trying to do here is open it up and say, look, yeah, Mechayim Eitim doesn't mean actually necessarily, could mean taking bodies out of the grave and giving them life, or it could mean the Hasidic interpretation about the ways inside of me that have been dead inside. But people read it and they say, I don't believe in Jesus and God resurrecting the dead. This is some ancient stuff. I'm out of here. And then we're like, no, before you go, it doesn't have to mean what it meant 1,800 years ago. Wait. No, we've moved on from that. And no, you don't like it, Ben.
Do people really believe in that there are like chakras all over their body?
Yeah, where are you living?
Really? Do they really believe it? I think most people will sit in yoga class and do the breathing and do whatever, and who cares if this stuff is true or not? Who cares if they believe it? They're involved in the practice, and the practice has benefits for them that they buy into. I think people, hear all kinds of stuff they don't really believe that doesn't turn them off or alienate them or force them out of the space. They say, okay, I'm going to go with it and see what happens. And I don't think
this is from your Mamet reading. This is from your
yeah,
Mamet.
well,
The Jews are too quick to rebel against their own Judaism.
I think it's because we, especially in the intellectual conservative tradition, have convinced people that yes, this can make sense. Don't worry, we have an explanation. You encounter this thing that you don't like or makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't understand or don't believe. Don't worry, we have an explanation. And I think actually we have over-explained. And sometimes you just have to dive in and let go and be like, okay, this doesn't make sense, or okay, I don't believe it. But you know what? If I show up every day or every week or every month and do this, in a year, something will have happened.
Hooray. Right.
All right. So that, again, classic rabbinic take on this, that it is the ritualizing, the doing it over time, the embedding yourself in the experience of the traditional Jewish prayers, that when you do it day after day, year over year, you can achieve something that intellectually you could never possibly get to. And obviously that's true. I think that's true, but I do think that there is handholding. And there is accommodation for the fact that this has been delivered in bad ways before. It has been used as a bludgeon, the Bible, over people's heads to harm people, to tell people they're not good. It's been used to discriminate against people. And I don't think as a rabbi, I can ignore that as much as I just might like to tell you the truth. I just might like to say, well, I'm not a bigot. I'm not going to discriminate against you, even though people have used this text before. I think that's too Pollyanna. That's my take. Let's move back. Let's go on to Rabbi Feld.
to Solomon Sector Day School. I went to summer camps, Jewish summer camps. I went to services pretty much every Shabbat my whole life growing up. And there are a lot of elements of the service that I think people take for granted that you know, for instance, or that a person would know. For instance, I remember from a very early age at Solomon Schechter, we would have services in the morning and kids would recite the Amidah, the devotional prayer. And the kids who seemed a little bit more religiously erudite would know when to bow exactly, and they'd do sort of the 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. But nobody ever explicitly explained that to me, when to do it and why. And one thing I really appreciated was that the Siddur actually explains that, what these gestures are for. And I wonder, just for people listening out there, if you could explain this sort of the 3 steps forward at the start of the Amidah and the 3 steps backward, what is that meant to evoke?
So, first of all, I should remark that we've put in these signals very carefully in the Siddur, the moments of bowing with a special sign attached to it. And in the Hallel, for instance, we have a special sign at the moment that the lulav is shaken on the holiday of Sukkot. And all of these signals have an explanation attached to them, so that, yes, it very much is a matter of allowing congregants to feel welcome and not to feel awkward in the service. Much of the choreography of the Siddur is taken from court practice, and so the 3 steps forward is as if we're approaching the presence of an important personage, a sovereign. The 3 steps backward at the end of the prayer is as if we're stepping back from the court. The bowing is that kind of initial recognition that one is talking to someone of note. Again, it's taken from courtly practice. It was also minimized by the rabbis. That is to say, the bowing takes place at the beginning and at the end of the Amidah, but not constantly through the Amidah. It was a coming into God's presence with a sense of awe, and what is supposed to be felt is that one is talking directly to God. That is, the choreography is supposed to instill a real sense of presence, of, yes, this is a direct speech to the divine.
As I understand it, you've also included some entirely new prayers. There's one that marks transitions in life. Why did you feel there was a need particularly for that kind of prayer?
We wanted the prayer book to speak to people in terms of being able to express the critical moments in their lives. And so when the ark is open, we have a whole series of personal prayers before the open ark. A prayer when sad, a prayer for the day of rest, a prayer for transitions in life, a prayer of gratitude. And then in the Torah service itself, we've added a prayer which was a traditional prayer. It was in the Talmud and then somehow has fallen out of Jewish practice, and we've put it back in, which is a prayer in recognition of the good things that has happened in one's life, a prayer to be recited on joyous occasions. I don't know, a birthday, an anniversary, moving into a new house, getting a new job. And we've added a Misha Berach prayer, a prayer which is recited not by the congregant, but is recited by the leader of the service, blessings for someone experiencing a transition in life. And we have a note, the blessing may be offered for one graduating, taking a new job, entering or leaving military service, moving to a new community, moving on after a divorce, beginning retirement, or experiencing any other moments of significant change. And it begins, Misha Amar La'avino Lech Lecha, may the one who told our ancestor to go forth, and then asks that God be with us in our journey.
What has the reception been so far to this new Siddur?
People have told me that it just transforms their sense of service. First of all, I don't believe that anybody can concentrate fully through an especially long Jewish service. And what the commentary on the side and the alternate prayers allow is for people to allow their minds to wander, to be in the service, to think about something, to be struck by a comment, to read an alternative prayer, and then to come back together into the service, to move in and out in that way, which is much more natural for us and much more our way of being. My hope has been that this helps to transform and revive services in conservative synagogues and in independent congregations which buy the Siddur. I know people who sit with the Siddur at home and it's revived their sense of prayer, just even without a congregation. And that's been really our hope for the Siddur.
If you had to pick one new element from Siddur Lev Shalem that most excites you, what would it be?
I'm very much tied to the translation. Since you say one thing, let me read one poem that we put into the Siddur. It's a poem by Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Halevi is a 12th century Spanish poet, and I don't know if this has been said in a synagogue for, I don't know, the last 500 years or whatever, but we added it as a meditation for the beginning of prayer. Almighty, nothing exists without you, and none can be like you, the source of all, maker and creator. You have no image eyes observe, but the soul, lodged in the heart, recognizes you and sees your glory's breath, encompassing all. For in you all finds its place, but you occupy no place. My soul, seeing but unseen, come thank the seeing but unseen, and bless.
Rabbi Feld, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Okay, so there you go. That is a little bit about what Rabbi Feld, the senior editor of this book, was trying to accomplish. And I think throughout the conversation here, we see some of the difficulties in having a prayer book where they have different ways to be utilized. I think one of the challenges of our congregation, it's a great challenge, is we have many different people from all parts of the world with different relationships to tefillah and to God and to Judaism, and having a text that can serve the tradition, allow us to get through the service with the traditional prayers, and also allow a pathway in, an avenue into people who, have been bouncing around from some difficult interpretations and experiences related to Judaism so that they can find a way in. I want to share with you before we conclude. Yeah, Don, go right ahead if you have a point.
Yeah, I just really love this rabbi.
Eddie Feld? I love Ed Feld. Absolutely.
Is he alive?
Yes, he's in Northampton. Look him up, Rabbi Ed Feld. He's wonderful.
Really incredible.
Yes, his wife is a wonderful poet, Meryl Feld, as well.
Okay, just great. I love where he talked about that, to get through the whole service is very difficult for most people. And that when that happens, where the mind tends to go, or where my mind would go, is like, oh, this doesn't work. What am I doing here? It gets into the negative. But if you can go to the left-hand side,
Bingo.
instead of just going negative, you can still engage and engage in that way, and then come back to the service. So I find that a beautiful thing. And the other thing was that since a lot of people don't speak Hebrew or don't read Hebrew, you can read the English translation and also read the left side, the commentary. And it's going to be my practice, because I can read, I don't read Hebrew so well anymore. But I figure if I go to the service, I can read the left-hand side, the English, following it. And then even when that gets a little too bizarre, I can go to the commentary. And I'm going to try just staying with that side.
Don, you can stay on that side. You don't have to go over to the other side. You can stay on. So this is Friday night, right? You can stay on that side,
right?
And you can sing along too with Rabbi Russell, right?
So see,
in our old book, we didn't have Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. So people would just sing Lecha Dodi, and then Rabbi Russell would go Shamor. But now we have it here. So you can stay on this side. You can be with the alternative midrashic or creative or new interpretations. You can have the more literal translation of the text, which was an area of Sim Shalom that I did find frustrating as someone who understands the Hebrew and the English, was saying that the two of them didn't connect or correspond, was a little disconcerting. So this is more literal, and it has increased transliteration so that
it does have, so it has
there's more transliteration, so you can sing along. For all those people who can't read in the Hebrew, can sing along in the transliteration without feeling alienated by not being able to read the Hebrew and us not singing the English.
Beautiful. Yeah, so my last thing, there just seems to be a lot more, like you're trying to bring more people in. There's a lot more that people can do who don't have the same knowledge as a lot of the
That's
people.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And even more so than that, so they add, how do you bring more people in? Well, even more so is, that's not the right one. I didn't get to the Hanukkah stuff, Rabbi Russell, is inclusion. So there are some updates on this prayer book towards the effort of inclusion. So this is Rabbi Carol Levithan. We added the Imotenu after Avotenu. So perhaps you've been in our shul on a Shabbat and you've heard, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak. Hold on, let me go. Instead of trying to sing it to you, I can just pull it up for you here. There has been some confusion because some of our prayer leaders like to put in Imotenu. So here it is. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. Right? So we didn't have that in the old book. But why are we just talking about our fathers when we're talking about both our fathers and our mothers? So that's one change that has been made. So there will always be that Imotenu. Bringing Miriam into the Siddur, acknowledging that a few lines of Shirat HaYam are attributed to her. Miriam is also included in the first column of a commentary that cites ancient sources, suggesting she might have recited each line of the song. Miriam's name also appears alongside of Moses at the end of the Shema. For the end of Shabbat, Siddur Lev Shalem turns again to Miriam, who is included in the song for the Havdalah. We have included increasing stuff about the matriarchs and avoiding gender, language, and stereotypes. So a subtle example of the scrupulous avoidance of gender language. One sets the dining table before the outset of Shabbat, just so there's old stuff that creeps in that gets left from one Siddur, from one generation to the next. Bringing other community members into the Siddur, so the Misha Berach has now blessings for adoption, the birth of a grandchild, appropriate language for single men and women, gay or heterosexual couples, all included. And there's greater sensitivity for non-Jews. So for example, Siddur Lev Shalem includes an option to omit the words of the fourth brachot of the Amidah velo natati Elokeinu legoye ha'artzot, right? The commandment explaining this option points out that the language came into our Siddur in the Middle Ages during the time of persecution. So you might not like that, right? You might see this and say, oh, that you didn't give us like the other, you didn't make us like the Goyim. You might hear that and you might bristle from that appropriately. Well, this Lev Shalem says, well, the reason it's in that is because this came out of the Middle Ages. This was during the time of persecution. It was put in to make us feel good during a tough time. On a related subject, the reason for adding the phrase, if you know this, at the end of the Kaddish, V'al kol yoshvei tevel, and to all who dwell on the earth, added to all of the Kaddishes, is explained as including a universalist dimension to certain prayers for peace, which otherwise just conclude on only Yisroel. So that is our first lesson on our Siddur Lev Shalem. We are going to begin using it on the Shabbat, Saturday morning, December 4th. It's Shabbat of Hanukkah, so I look forward to you joining us for that. We are on Zoom. We're in person at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for Minyan on Thanksgiving. We are on Zoom at 4 o'clock before sundown this coming Friday. We're in person 10 a.m. this coming Shabbat morning. Is there a PDF of the, not one that I can give you. I can't really give you a PDF of this, but we can connect afterwards. Stuart, send me and Rabbi Russell an email. We'll make sure that you can track in a PDF for yourselves. And yes, we certainly will need PDFs for all of our online programming. And then it's going to be Hanukkah. So come on Sunday. We have Maccabee Mitzvah 1 to 4. We're going to be being like the Maccabees and cleaning up our temple. And then at 4 o'clock, we've got latkes and drinks and parties and plays and a lot of fun. That is this coming Sunday. So happy Thanksgiving. I hope everyone enjoys your turkey or your tofurkey. And I look forward to seeing you on Hanukkah. All right, take care. Bye-bye.